You know, I think I might have the distinction of being the most canceled speaker that you've ever had. Yep, I do own that. And so I'm really glad that we finally got together in person. And I know there's a whole lot of you watching this virtually. A number of friends of mine are here and business associates, so thank you for being here. So let's talk about this carton of fries or lies. When Mary asked me to speak and said I needed to come up with a title, well, after 30 years with Sonic and then Red Robin, I couldn't resist this title, Would You Like an Order of Lies with Your Burger? But I'm going to tell you, it's not just a clever title, but it's really relevant to our discussion, and I'll explain that as we go along. But first I'm going to answer what has to be your burning question. Why, if I was with Sonic and Red Robin, am I holding McDonald's fries? Well, it's our first lesson in integrity. Those of us in the food business know that fries don't travel well. And these fries have been here probably an hour or so. And one of my jobs at both companies was to protect the brand integrity of Sonic and Red Robin, and I'm still fiercely loyal to them. And no way was I going to have fries up here from Red Robin or Sonic that were bad. But McDonald's was always a competitor, so I didn't mind having their bad fries up here. And I would not recommend eating them. So, speaking of fries though, let me ask you a question, and I need you all to be really honest with me. How many of you can get a carton of hot, fresh fries and eat just one? Raise your hand if you can eat just one. Are you raising your hand? All right, okay, so Lynn raised her hand. She is either the most disciplined person in the room or she's not telling the truth. I'm not sure which. But thank you to the rest of you for being very honest and truthful. And we already knew the answer. From research we've done in the food industry, we know that the vast majority of people cannot eat just one fry or one potato chip. So let me ask you another question. Have any of you ever gone through drive-through on the way home and you've picked up burgers and fries for your family? And I'm telling my own story right here. And you decided that you didn't need fries. You were not going to order them. And so that bag of burgers and fries is sitting next to you in the passenger seat. And it smells really good. And so you decide you're just going to try one and make sure, see if it tastes as good as it smells. And then you eat another, and then you eat another. And then you get home and you put the food out and you get busted by one of your children or maybe your spouse who says, hey, did you eat my fries on the way home? And what do? We actually lie. We say, no, they must have fallen out in the bag, or maybe they didn't fill that one full. Well, that, my friends, is the slippery slope that we're on. So as I look at some of the biggest scandals in corporate America, accounting fraud, lying, stealing, misleading investors, personal profiting from what's going on, and I can list all the names, Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, Lehman Brothers, the college admission scandals, we could go on and on. I have a theory that those didn't start as big scandals. I have a theory that they started as a single lie or a single cover-up. And then they got away with it, or that cover-up had to be covered up, and so that single fry or that single lie became a carton of fries or lies. Now, with all the scandals that happened, there was a big spotlight put on this, and it resulted in legislation and regulation. Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, organizations like OK Ethics working to train and bring awareness to this issue. And companies all over the place stepped up. They stepped up their focus on ethics and integrity and putting training and education and controls in place. So one could assume that it's gotten better, right? Maybe not. Many of us who are on boards get this magazine. It's called Agenda. It comes out weekly, and it's for directors of corporations. And the January 31st issue, the headline is, Directors Tolerate Worsening Behavior. And I'm just going to read a paragraph. Board members are more willing now than they were in 2020 to mislead auditors and regulators, falsify financial records, and accept unethical behavior from company leaders, the data shows. All the while, according to Ernst & Young's 2022 Global Integrity Report, a growing gap has developed between what business leaders say is important and their actions. It's the 2022 report. And they go on to say that part of the blame can go to the pandemic, remote work, the extreme business and stock market volatility. And as I look around at 2022 and what's coming in 2023, the business volatility that's going to exist with the stock market in the US, the global economy, I don't see the pressures easing on business leaders at all in the near term. And this is something we should all be alarmed about. And it should serve as a wake-up call for us as well. So what can we do? What can we do as companies, as individuals, as parents? Yes, I said parents, and we'll talk about that in a minute. What can we do as leaders? Well, what I hope to do today is share with you some of the things that I've learned. And I've been able to live in this incredible bubble, as I know many of you have. I've spent my entire career in Oklahoma. I've had the opportunity to work with some of Oklahoma's best companies, the Williams companies, Ad Inc., I'll talk about them, Sonic, One Oak, One Gas, Quick Trip, and I think these companies all embody the gold standard for ethical and operating with integrity. And I'm going to share some stories and some experiences that I've learned over time. I'm going to start with a story from Ad Inc. I went to work for the Williams companies right out of college, and then my second job was with Ad Inc., a Tulsa-based ad agency. We were one of the leading agencies in the state, and we handled blue-chip Oklahoma clients. Sonic was a client, Thrifty Rent-A-Car, Bank of Oklahoma. We'd worked for Getty Oil, Citgo Petroleum, and a long list of other great Oklahoma companies. Tom Tripp was the chairman and founder of Ad Inc., and he was a man of great integrity. I joined the company as an account executive, and he sat me down and explained that I would probably encounter with some of my clients requests from them for favors or tickets. They might spend money with a radio station that was promoting an upcoming concert, and the client rep would want some tickets, and that was okay for us to use our influence to do that on a small scale on an occasional basis. And he said, unfortunately, you may encounter some bigger requests that are not okay. And he said, I want you to bring those to me if you get them and not try to handle them yourself. Little did I know what he knew, the client that I'd been assigned to, that was going to be a test. I was 28 years old, and I'm not going to name the company. It was none of the ones I mentioned, by the way, none of those companies. But the client was often asking for favors or requests. And one day, that client crossed the line with a really big request, and a request to change our media budget to accommodate his request. So I took it to Tom. I didn't know what to do about it. And Tom asked me to take a seat in his office and wait while he made a phone call. He called the senior executive of that company, and this apparently was a recurring problem, and he said to him while I was sitting there, you know, we've had this conversation before about the person that works with us, and we've talked about the importance of integrity and that we aren't going to make bad decisions for you as our client just so that person can get tickets to, in this case, it was the US Open, and they had no business advertising in tennis. And he said, obviously this isn't as important of an issue to you since we've talked about it before as it is to us, so I think it would be best if we just part ways. And we will still be your agency through a transition while you look for another agency. Tom Tripp fired that client that day. Talk about a great lesson at 28 years old on the business value of integrity. That's what I learned from him. You know, Sonic was another great example. We were the franchisor of a chain that was 85% franchised, and we had to be above reproach at the corporate office in dealing with our vendors. Our franchisees were spending hundreds of millions of dollars with our vendors, and Cliff Hudson, who was CEO, made sure that we couldn't be seen as taking advantage of those vendors or getting gifts from them or going on trips. So this was back in the early 90s, and we were in an effort to make sure that we had the right procedures and policies in place, and also to ensure that certain large franchisees weren't doing the same thing, that anything that we got from the vendors needed to go to marketing and needed to go to help support the business, not individual business people. So we had a policy that we couldn't accept a gift from a vendor unless it was under $25 or immediately consumable. I will tell you, we had some pretty interesting discussions about whether that handle of Jack Daniels was technically immediately consumable. We did have to discuss that, and Steve knows this. Our vendors were aware of this policy as well. Coming from the agency side, I was especially careful to make sure that our agency knew that we expected them to report this to us, and our whole team knew. Unfortunately, one of the most brilliant marketers I had ever hired didn't seem to believe that policy applied to them. And after 2 offenses, repeated training and reiteration of the policy, I had to fire this individual on the 3rd offense. It was unfortunate. He was really good, but it was the right thing to do. You may be surprised to learn that my board term at Red Robin started with an ethics breach. Let me tell you a little bit of the background on that. Red Robin had been around for a number of years. They'd had several different companies that owned the company, and at this point in time in the 90s, they were owned by a Japanese company. And they weren't doing a very good job of managing the company. But Red Robin's first franchisee, a gentleman named Mike Snyder, was doing really well. He had built 40 Red Robins, was quite successful, and he went to Tokyo and met with the company, came back as COO and then ultimately CEO to try to turn things around, and ultimately he bought the parent company and merged it with his franchise organization. Mike was a visionary leader. He was a gifted operator, and he executed a remarkable turnaround of Red Robin as a private company. And again, this was in the late 90s, and as many private companies do, they may do things that those of us that are in public companies say, well, you can't do that, and they may raise some eyebrows. But he was still a franchisee, even though he was president of the company. He had brought in some executives who were also still franchisees. He had some board members who were doing a substantial amount of business with Red Robin. And again, private company, not illegal to do those things. And I had gotten to know the company because one of my executives at Sonic had gone to work for them, and I was retired from Sonic, so they had brought me in as a consultant to help them with strategic planning. So I'd gotten to know the management team, and I was very impressed with what they had done to turn the company around. But I was very shocked when I got a call one day from one of the board members who told me that news was going to break that night that the CEO and the CFO had reached a settlement agreement with the SEC after a long investigation into misrepresentation of personal travel expenses as business expenses, primarily charter aircraft. They were being fined by the SEC. They were barred from ever serving in a public company again because, by the way, they had gone public. They were a private company, but in 2001, they had gone public, and this was 2007. I left that part out. The things you can do when you're a private company, you can't do when you're a public company. And they continued to do those things. The sad thing is that they both could have afforded to charter the aircraft or pay the taxes on what needed to be reported as income, because now Red Robin was in a problem also because they hadn't reported properly the income. And so he told me that they were being fired in addition to being fined and barred from public company, and he asked me if I would be willing to join the board. He was stepping in as the chairman and the CEO and had some board cleanup to do and was embarking on a very strong path of regaining ethics and integrity as a guiding principle. So knowing all those things, I agreed to join the board. A couple of years later, I became chair of the board, and I can absolutely tell you that ethics and integrity are strong guiding principles still at Red Robin. I've had the privilege of being on for-profit boards, chairing them both public and private. I've been involved on boards of nonprofits, both large national nonprofits and smaller community and often founder-led nonprofits, and I've been on ministry boards. And you know as well as I do that there can and will be ethics breaches in all of those types of circumstances. Now, sometimes they're easy, and I say relatively easy and relatively painless, like the decision I had to make with the marketer at Sonic, and you can make them quickly and you can move on with some disruption to the business. But sometimes they're really hard. Let's say it's a top performer or a founder, or in Red Robin's case, a successful CEO of a public company that is doing quite well, who's well loved by the operators and well respected by Wall Street. Those are much harder decisions, and they require careful investigation. You have to understand whether the allegations are real or false. You have to act quickly. You often have to do it in a very public way, and I can promise you that it's often inconvenient if you have to make a hard decision with a top performer. Could even be bad for business in the short term. I know that board member at Red Robin didn't have on his to-do list to step in as interim CEO and chair of the board. So you've got to do it. And I think we've all seen the headlines where companies don't do it, where they ignore it, they brush it under the rug, they hope it will go away. It never goes away. You can run it to ground, you can prove it's not true, but it really never goes away. I want to tell you, read some things from Wells Fargo. Everybody probably remembers the big Wells Fargo scandal, but you may not know all of the circumstances, and I pulled this from Forbes, 2 different articles. Wells Fargo came under fire for widespread fraudulent accounts in 2016, but an employee tried to alert the CEO of the issue in 2007. I didn't know that. The now former employee was transferred after warning supervisors about unethical behavior happening throughout his region, and he even warned that illegal sales practices could lead to fraud, lawsuits, and regulatory sanctions, all of which did hit Wells Fargo in 2016. So when the news broke, the bank had created more than 2 million fake accounts. They were going to pay, this was in 2016, $185 million in penalties. There were congressional committees and hearings. The CEO, John Stumpf, abruptly retired. And with penalties paid and the leadership changed, the trouble seemed well on its way to its resolution. But it wasn't. Fast forward to 2020. In January of 2020, Stumpf agreed to pay a $17.5 million fine to the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And they sought another $37.5 million in fines from 5 other ex-officers. In February of that year, Wells Fargo agreed to pay $3 billion to resolve federal criminal and civil investigations. In November, the former CEO agreed to pay the SEC another $2.5 million fine, and they brought other charges. And they discovered in 2020 it wasn't 2 million accounts, it was 3.5 million fake accounts. They also had charged 800,000 car loan customers for insurance that they didn't even know about, and wound up paying another $1 billion fine and a class action lawsuit settlement of $400 million. I promise you, these problems never ever go away. Now I want to brag a minute about One Oak, One Gas, and Quick Trip, 2 public, 1 private companies that I've had the privilege of being on their boards. And I can absolutely tell you that they set the tone at the top, that ethics and integrity is a very high priority. I think we've got one of the company's internal auditors with us virtually, the head of internal audit for Quick Trip today, and I know their internal audit groups from the other 2 companies will be with us tomorrow. And I can tell you that in their case, internal audit, they are not the inspection squad, they're not the police department, they are highly valued business partners with the rest of the business. They report directly to the audit committee. We see the good, bad, and the ugly, which I think that's great. That's the title of your August talk. They see that and they share it with us. The board has full transparency. These companies all have the appropriate safeguards, controls in place, and internal audit is there to make the divisions and the departments better. And that's just exactly how it should be. Now, they all have hotlines, even the private company, Quick Trip, they have hotlines for employees to use that go directly to the chair of the audit committee. I'm chair of Quick Trip's audit committee. And I can tell you, because of the robust culture they have, there are very few, and it comes in an email to me, directly to me. Employees have a lot of other avenues, so I get almost no emails to me on that hotline. In fact, a couple of times I've asked them to go check and make sure it's still working, because there's just nothing. But it did work, and it worked very well in 2020. Now, I've never had a financial fraud issue, but in 2020, I learned how unhappy employees were with the mask mandate, and how hard it was for these frontline employees to deal with the unhappy customers, the angry customers, and to try to do their jobs wearing masks. And I gained a lot of empathy for what they were going through. And I turn all of those over to HR, and I know that they dealt with those. But the point is, these companies have these controls. We see conflict of interest reports as board members. We see all the complaints, the investigations that take place, the subsequent findings, whether they're substantiated or not, and what the disciplinary action is. We go through annual compliance training, as the companies do, and ethics and integrity are front and center. And as I said, these executives model the behavior. And I hope that's what all your companies are doing. It's what all companies should be doing. But I'm here to tell you it's not enough. There's a missing piece. And I'm going to use another restaurant term. That missing piece is what I call the secret sauce. So I'm going to ask you all a question. So I need some participation now. What are the 4 most important words that you should encourage your children and your employees to say? I'll give you a hint. It's not, "I didn't do it." Okay, so somebody raise their hands. Tell me what those 4 most important words are. Anyone? It's a phrase or a question.
How can I help?
What was it?
How can I help?
Well, how can I help you is a very good answer, and it's part of the answer, and we're going to come to it in a little bit, but it's not what I'm looking for this time. Anyone else?
Yes, I did that.
Okay, very close. Almost exact. The answer is, I made a mistake. That's the answer. I made a mistake. And I believe that a lot of these lies and cover-ups and bad decisions come because of fear of reprisals, fear of losing your job if you admit you made a mistake, or as a child, fear of punishment that is disproportionate to the crime, or not being believed. So how many of you in the room are parents? Okay. Well, I've got 2 daughters and 3 grandsons. I really believe this journey for ethics and integrity starts with your children and the lessons we teach them. My mom was a kindergarten teacher, and it is true. Everything you need to know, you learn in kindergarten, at least I did. My mother used to stress to me the importance of telling the truth, always. She used to say, the consequences of lying are far worse than the consequences of telling the truth. And she put it into practice. I'm going to share 3 stories that I remember vividly from my childhood. I was a big fan, I was about 11, I was a big fan of Nancy Drew books. Anybody here remember Nancy Drew? She wrote mystery books, and she always solved a mystery in each book. Well, this one particular book I was reading, there was a clue hidden in canned goods. And so she filled a bathtub with warm water, put the canned goods in the bathtub, and floated the labels off, and she found the clue, and she solved the mystery. And I thought, I wonder if that really works. Well, my parents had gone to the grocery store, and I decided to try it. Now, something a couple of you know about me is I'm a go big or go home type of person. So I didn't just put 2 cans in the bathtub. I put all of our cans in the bathtub. And remember, my parents were raised during the Depression. We had I don't know, 20 or more canned goods of fruit and vegetables and soup, and I put them all in the bathtub. Good news, it worked, just like it did in the book. The bad news, as I was looking at 20 naked cans floating in the bathtub, the bad news is that it worked. And I realized this was a really, really bad idea because now we had no idea what was in any of these cans. So I confessed the crime as soon as my parents got home. I didn't get grounded. I didn't get corporal punishment, but I did get a punishment to fit the crime. My mother decided that if she was looking for vegetables and open fruit, it was going to cost me 25 cents. She didn't really care what kind of vegetable it was, and I didn't get to care anymore either. And I didn't like peas, for example. But she opened peas, I was eating peas. Absolutely. Same thing with the fruit. I quickly separated the Campbell's soup cans because they were smaller, and I got pretty good at shaking the cans and saying, these are definitely peas. We're not opening those. But it was a punishment to fit the crime. When I was in high school, I got a $5 a week allowance, probably still paying off my debt on the cans, but one day she handed me a folded bill out of her billfold, and as I was walking to the bedroom, I opened it, and it was a $20 bill. And I turned around on my heel, and I went back, and I said, you accidentally gave me a 20. And she looked at me and said, congratulations, you passed the test. You may keep the 20. And my last story, you may not think has anything to do with ethics, but it does have to do with admitting mistakes. When I was in high school, I went with a group of friends to a party. I had no idea until I got there. There were no parents and there was alcohol. And those were two things that I knew very clearly were not allowed in our house. I couldn't get anyone to take me home, so I called my parents. My mom answered the phone. I told her what had happened and would my dad come and get me. And she said, absolutely. And then she said, but I've got an idea. Why don't we have a party here? I'll grill some hamburgers and hot dogs. I'll make chocolate chip cookies. Invite as many of your friends as you want to come. My dad made 3 trips to get friends, and we indeed had a party at our house. I could have gotten grounded. I could have gotten yelled at. I could have gotten not believed that I didn't know that I was going to wind up at a party like that. Instead, they celebrated me telling the truth. Because had it been the other way, I might have just stayed at the party and not said anything. I might have feared the consequences. These are lessons Mark and I have tried to teach our children and now with our grandchildren, but it's something that I encourage all of us to do, not just with our children, but with our employees. My first job out of college was at the Williams Companies, and I worked for a very wise boss. And he said to me, I want you to understand that I'm paying you for quantity, not quality. Well, I was quite puzzled by that statement. And he went on to say, I want really good quality, but I need quantity as well from you. And perfection can be paralyzing. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make some bad decisions. And I hope you do, because that's how you're going to learn. And he said, in our business, mistakes are rarely fatal, and there are almost always solutions to fix them. I want you and everyone who works for me to have the freedom to let us know and let me know if there's been a bad decision or a mistake and what the solutions are to fix that. I thought that was great advice. I didn't really hear the solutions part, and I learned that one the hard day. I walked into his office. I had been to the printers to proofread, and you're a printer, you know about this, an annual report that was ready to print. And a final press check, I found a mistake that was not a good one, and one that I should have caught well before it was getting ready to print, because the fixes then are expensive and timely, and they were going to cost us the deadline. So I went back to his office and I told him, I got a big problem, made this terrible mistake. I didn't bring him a solution. Well, he looked at me, and I got to give you a disclaimer though. Do not try this. If you try what he did, I promise you today, this was 1984, you will wind up in the HR department. So don't try what he did. He opened his drawer, he took out a water pistol, a loaded water pistol, and he shot me in the shoulder with the water pistol. As I'm watching water run down my shoulder, I said, why did you do that? And he said, I shoot people who don't bring me solutions. Remember what I told you? I pay for solutions. I don't care if you bring me the right solution. I don't care if it's the only solution. I don't care if you gathered all your colleagues and brainstormed a number of solutions. I don't even care if it's the one I ultimately pick. But when you bring me a problem, bring me a solution. That was also a lesson that made an indelible mark on me. So I decided that I would be remiss if I talked to you and didn't share with you some of my biggest mistakes and some of my worst decisions. The problem was I had a really hard time picking which one I was going to share, but I finally picked two from Sonic. One of them is about admitting mistakes and asking for help. So when I was at Sonic, one of our best promotions was the chicken strip basket and the steak finger basket. Some of you may remember it came with Texas toast and gravy and French fries, and they were always big sellers when we did them. We also allowed our local markets to do local promotions, and we had learned that Louisiana was having a lot of success with a fried shrimp promotion during the Lent season. And we thought that might be a great system-wide promotion. So we went out and tested it in a number of different markets, used our appropriate testing protocols, and it tested well. And so we decided we wanted to launch a 6-week promotion. We'd always done 4 before, with steak fingers, chicken strips, and fried shrimp. Now our franchisees, many of them were quite skeptical about this and didn't really want to do it, but we persuaded them to do it anyway. So lesson number 1 here is listen to your customers, your employees, and those who are closest to your customers, in our case, the franchise operators. You might guess now where I'm going with this. It was an absolute epic disaster of a promotion. Turns out, despite the data we had bad data, we read it wrong, we read it to tell us what we wanted to say. There's a whole host of issues with it. But it turns out our customers did not want fried shrimp from us at all, particularly in the non-coastal regions. And as Steve Wells knows, that's most of them at Sonic. And franchisees were panicking. They were returning to the distributor unopened boxes of shrimp. They were refusing the shipments of shrimp. Try to say that. They were refusing it, and we were only a couple of weeks into the promotion. Would it have maybe caught hold? Well, we didn't have a chance to find out because they didn't have shrimp anymore. They were sending it all back. So 3 weeks into the promotion, we made the decision to cancel the promotion. Lesson number 2, admit your mistakes and take decisive action to fix them. Lesson number 3, own up to the mistake at the highest level in the chain of command. It would have been very, very easy for me to have said, well, that is market research's fault, or the marketing department should have caught that. I could have even roped in the ad agency. It might have been a stretch, but I could have blamed a lot of people. But the fact is, I approved the promotion. I saw the research. I heard the franchisee concern, and we all missed it. Every one of us missed it. Now you might be thinking, okay, so you had to cancel a promotion. Well, let me share the rest of the story. Our distributor called purchasing and said, what would you like us to do with your $3 million worth of shrimp? And that was a lot of money and a lot of shrimp back then. And they were very clear it wasn't their mistake and it wasn't their problem, and rightly so. It was absolutely not. Now, Sonic, luckily, had a very strong culture of solutions orientation and not blaming. And so I didn't really feel like my job was in jeopardy yet, but I did know that Cliff Hudson expected me to have a solution for this. And short of opening my own seafood restaurant, I literally had no idea what we would do. And so I asked everyone for help. We brought in operations and marketing and purchasing, and we asked legal, and probably even went to the accounting department. We brought the ad agency in and said, we are looking for creative solutions. I have no idea what they're going to be, and none of us had any really good ideas, but we were saying, let's brainstorm, let's throw ideas up on the wall. And the media director for the agency attended the meeting, and he had an idea, but he didn't share it. He went back and fleshed it out. He came back a few days later and said, I think I've got a solution for you. He had contacted a barter company that bartered and traded goods and services and media time. And this company had agreed to take the shrimp off our hands if we would spend $3 million advertising on national cable. And that was really at the beginning when national cable took off. We were just doing local TV advertising. And we would spend $3 million advertising on CNN, TBS, TNN. And we had looked at that before but never done it. We were a regional chain in 37 states, and we didn't think it was a good use of our money to advertise in all these places where we weren't. But at that moment in time, we thought it sounded like a really good way to spend our money. We would at least get something out of it. It would be a test for us, and it was actually the only idea anybody had. Now, anybody want to guess where that shrimp wound up? We could sit here forever. You would never guess. The shrimp wound up in the Canadian prison system. That's right. Prisoners in Canada got some great food for a short amount of time. They got sonic shrimp. It wasn't labeled as sonic shrimp, but the product was actually quite good. And I tell this story and I'm like, this is the truth. I literally could not make this up. They got shrimp. We got 3 months of advertising on national cable, and guess what happened? Our brand awareness went through the roof. We had record sales during those 3 months. Our franchise sales department got deluged from people calling, wanting to inquire about opening Sonic franchises in markets where we weren't. My fourth lesson is ask for help. It may come from the most unexpected places. We embarked on a national cable advertising. We shifted our advertising, and it really accelerated Sonic's growth. You really have no idea where you're going to get the help. And cultures that don't value and appreciate admitting mistakes and finding solutions, that's where you get the ethics breaches. So my last Sonic story is about NASCAR. We knew that our customers were NASCAR fans, and we had dabbled in some minor promotions, but we had never considered sponsoring a driver or a car because it was usually a 7-year commitment and incredibly expensive. Well, one day we got a call from Richard Childress Racing. They were the owner group for Dale Earnhardt. And Dale Earnhardt had announced that he was going to retire in 3 years, and he was embarking on a 3-year farewell tour, and would we be interested in sponsoring it? Honestly, they probably saw our commercials on national cable. That's the way these weird things work. But we were very interested because this was something that would resonate with our customers, with our franchisees. It was a perfect combination of a legend and a storied brand. But we only had a month before the first race of the season. So we scrambled to get marketing done, to get the contract negotiations done, to get the branding, to get approval from our franchise community. And our general counsel at Sonic, Ron Matlock, if any of you know him, he was an incredible business partner to us, and he handled all the contract negotiations. But he came to us and said he wanted to make sure we understood there was a non-negotiable clause in the contract that said if Dale Earnhardt was incapacitated in any way and couldn't drive, then as long as Richard Childress brought in another driver, we were contractually obligated to finish that season. Whatever year we were in the contract, we had to finish that season. Well, we got it all done, and we agreed to the terms. We debated it quite a bit, but we ultimately agreed to it. 2 days before the first race, we created a satellite feed across the country where Dale Earnhardt could speak to all of the Sonic franchisees. We had him gathered in conference rooms everywhere, and he welcomed the Sonic franchisees to the family. You probably know what happens next. The first race of the season was Daytona 500. On the last lap, Dale Earnhardt crashes, a horrific crash, and tragically dies. It was an unbelievable tragedy, first for Dale's family, for Richard Childress Racing, for the racing world in general. I got to make the phone call that afternoon when we got the news before it broken publicly to Cliff Hudson and tell him what had happened and what our contractual obligation was, which was if Richard Childress decided to put someone into race, and we had obviously no idea, that we would be obligated to finish that season. We all very quickly agreed that our best approach was to be a patient, supportive partner with Richard Childress and just to wait, to offer our condolences, to offer our support. We went to the funeral. We said that we're going to stick by you, whatever you need to do, and we were waiting to hear. Well, he brought up a rookie, guy named Kevin Harvick, to finish the season. Some of you know this story. And we could have just finished the season, but we made the decision, we're going to stick this out for the 3 years, and instead of a farewell tour, we're going to put our marketing efforts into an introduction tour for Kevin Harvick. We brought him to our franchise convention. We set up meet and greets with customers and employees and franchisees as he traveled to different markets. And we even created what to this day is my favorite Sonic commercial. It didn't run very much, but I think it was one of our best commercials. We created a commercial with Richard Childress and Kevin Harvick sitting at a patio table, one of the red patio tables at a Sonic. And while they were eating their burgers and their tater tots and their drinks, they plotted race strategy. And Richard was using tater tots as the cars. I don't know if any of you remember that commercial, but he's got all these tater tots lined up, and when he would pause to take a drink or a bite of his burger, Kevin Harvick would eat the tater tots. And he said, "Where are all the cars going?" And Kevin said, "I ate them." And turns out he did. Kevin won Rookie of the Year that first year, and we had a great relationship with him. And I can tell you that the decision we made didn't go unnoticed by our customers, our employees, our franchisees, or by racing fans. It didn't go unnoticed by Richard Childress. He was so impressed, he became a Sonic franchisee. And, you know, I talk about doing things right or doing the right thing. We would have absolutely been doing things right if we had ended our agreement at the end of that season. We would have been doing things right. But doing the right thing meant honoring the entire 3 years. And luckily, we had a culture at Sonic of doing that. So my question to each of you today is, are you creating, whether you're the CEO of the company, whether you're the chair of a board of a nonprofit, or whether you run a department or a division, are you creating a culture of grace and accountability, or are you inadvertently allowing a culture of self-preservation and deniability to exist? So let me ask that question again. Are you creating a culture of grace and accountability at home and at work, in the community, whatever you have control over, or are you inadvertently allowing a culture of self-preservation and deniability? A really hard question that I have to ask is, and again, this may be for CEOs in the room or people who are running divisions, or even colleagues that you know. Are you creating that great culture of grace, but you know that somewhere else in the organization, there's a really successful leader, but she's known to be very volatile. She's known to have a temper, maybe be a bit of a tyrant, and people are afraid of her, and you kind of know that, and you've heard the rumors, but they're doing really well, and maybe they're just rumors. I'm back to the question, is there a subculture being created against everything you're trying to do of self-preservation and deniability? If people are afraid to speak up, if they're worried about their job, if there's a fear of reprisals, then I can promise you they're in a culture of self-preservation and deniability. And I can also promise you it makes a big difference to how your people and your children view ethics and integrity. One fry, one lie, or a carton of lies. Now, you may have guessed I'm a visual learner. Water pistols, cartons of fries. I have one less analogy that I want to share with you. And I'm borrowing this from my pastor, Alex Amaya, in Tulsa at Battle Creek Church. He used this in a sermon about a month ago, and I thought it was really great. So, let me ask you, if you can see this, what is this? No, it's not an alarm clock. Thermometer. Yeah, it's hard to see from up here. It's a thermometer. What do thermometers do? Measure the temperature. They monitor and measure a point in time. Now, knowing that this is a thermometer, I know you can't see this, but what do you think this is?
It's a thermostat.
It's a thermostat. What does a thermostat do?
Controls the temperature.
A thermostat controls the temperature and can change the environment. Well, thermometers are our hotlines, our conflict of interest reports, and the controls and the reports that we see. And those are necessary and very important, but they measure a point in time. The thermostat, we're the thermostat. We are the thermostat because we control and can change the environment. And I believe on this ethics journey that we have to have, all of us have to have the courage to always do the right thing. We have to have the curiosity to dig deeper and to look into and make sure that this is happening the way we need it to, this culture of grace, everywhere across the organization, and that we're not letting it slip because it's inconvenient or hard to do otherwise. And finally, we have to have the compassion to create that culture of grace, because I can assure you, everyone is watching. So our job is to be the thermostat. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions. And I think you're bringing me questions, is that correct? Anybody have any questions?
I didn't write it down, but,
Yes?
so what do you do if you're in a culture with people that are more the blame game kind of culture? How do you think people can handle that situation? What can they do?
What can you do
Could you
if,
repeat the question?
yes, what can you do if you're in a culture where it is more of a self-preservation, deniability, blame game? Ultimately, you have to make a personal decision if you believe you're in a position to influence and change that culture. If you're not, then it may not be the place you want to be. And I mean, that's a hard answer. Again, it's inconvenient, but I don't want to be in places like that. In fact, I'll tell you just a really, really quick story. At Sonic, I was working for a new president that they had hired. I was a VP. And he had come in, and it was pretty clear that he didn't fit our culture at Sonic at all. And he was making some decisions that may have had integrity issues, but were clearly not good for the business. But I was, what am I going to do? I don't know. Maybe he knows best. But as time went on, I started thinking, boy, this is not sustainable. And at first I said, well, you know, the senior management team, Cliff and the others, they're really smart people. They'll figure this out. Time continued to go on, and I said, maybe they're not as smart as I think they are. I couldn't very well go over his head and say anything to anybody. And so I told my husband, I'm going to get my resume out. I'm going to have to find another job. I can't stay here. And one day, the CFO walked into my office, and he shut the door, and he said, I'm going to say something to you. You cannot ask me any questions, but we feel the need to tell you this. We are not as dumb as you think we are. So his exact words. And we're aware of the problem, and we're fixing it. And then he turned around and walked out of my office. 3 months later, it takes a long time in corporate America, that president was gone. So sometimes you wait it out, but I was prepared to leave. So thank you for that question. Any others? I know we're running out of time. Ben?
On nonprofit boards where it's a great institution, but there's a how do you affect the change in a culture where you only walk in like once every 3 or 4 months?
it's harder if you're on a board of a nonprofit and you see something wrong, then you need to share that with the other board members. Maybe you think something's wrong, maybe they don't, but you have to share it with the board members and have to see if people are willing to deal with the issue or if they just want to brush it under the rug. And again, at some point, you have to make the same decision. And I've been in those situations, unfortunately. Okay. I know we're running out of time, so Mary, do you want to? Oh, you've got a couple? Okay.
Have you ever received pushback from your team for doing the right thing?
Yes. Have I ever received pushback from my team for doing the right thing? I would say pushback from individual team members, more likely for doing the right thing, but I try to be very transparent and say, as much as you can, it may be a personnel issue, and you may have to say, trust me, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't know things you don't know. But this is what we have to do. Yeah.
Very good. Are there any other questions? Yes.
What's your favorite Sonic menu item?
My favorite Sonic menu item is mixing a grape and lime slush together. That's because you can mix any of them. My favorite, which is just pure sugar, and I try not to do it very often, but it's a grape lime slush. Highly recommended. Okay. All right, thank you all very much. Enjoyed being here.